Hello, friends! I am testing out a new setup today. So I am in my studio space, which I've been redoing for a long time. I've got the walls painted back behind me. You can see my silver wall, which is the accent wall that I have in here. And you can kind of see, oh, sorry, over here, a little shimmer from the light that I have on my desk. And oh my gosh, I love this wall so much. I love it so much. It's so pretty. I wish you could just get a sense, even online, of just how pretty it is. I walk in this room and I'm just like, oh, it's so pretty. The rest of the walls are a darkish, like royal blue color, and I'll do some more lives with the blue wall behind me for right now. I wanted to try the silver wall. So kind of working with the lighting a little bit, and I got a new mic that testing it out to see how it works. Hopefully it works. And so I'm testing it out today by talking about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is introversion. I read last week, or actually I listened to a short podcast that had some tips for introverted entrepreneurs. I don't know why I did air quotes with introverted, but I did whatever. And so it got me thinking about how I interact with introverted students, and especially how things have changed a bit going online. I have found that it is a little bit different interacting with an introvert in the online lesson space, different than it was even in person. And so I wrote down some thoughts. I have notes, and so I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on how I have had to change up a little bit about how I interact with these introverted singers. So first of all, I think we all know that introversion and extroversion occur on a spectrum. There is hardly anybody that is 100% introvert, 100% extrovert, although I'm pretty darn close. When I take like the Myers-Briggs personality tests, I test at like 96% introvert, and so that little 4% of extroversion, small but sometimes mighty. It's a thing, and so I'm pretty extremely introverted, and so that means that I'm super comfortable in my own company. I um really love quiet and silence. Like almost all of my electronics are like down low as this volume is concerned, and even sometimes the brightness is down low just because that sensory input can be very, very stimulating. And so I have to manage that. Um, but anyway, so all of that occurs on the spectrum, and so your students may fall somewhere different than I do. And introverts are not a monolith. We are not all the same, just the same as extroverts are not all the same. And so we have a mix of these characteristics. But just knowing, I think the some of the common characteristics, I think, can help us interact with our students in a more knowledgeable, sensitive, and understanding way. And so here's some things that I have found to be very, very helpful with introverted students, particularly in the online lesson space. The first thing is you have to allow time for processing. If you ask them a question, they need time to think about it. And teachers, and it doesn't matter if we're introverts or extroverts, teachers have a tendency to want to fill the space with something. We restate questions, we answer our own questions. I read several years ago that the average time between a teacher asking a question and then that teacher answering their own question is 1 second. It's it's incredible. We tend to allow only about 1 second for a student to come up with an answer. And extroverts tend to process verbally. They tend to process out loud, while introverts, we tend to process internally, and that takes time. But I think it's interesting just to kind of riff on that idea for a second. Extroverts probably take the same amount of time to process things. They're just doing it externally. And so their processing is with sound, and they're filling the space with sound, whereas introverts, we are doing the same processing just internally. We're mulling things over inside. And so we need time to be able to do that, and we need silence to be able to do that. And so, if you are a teacher and you ask one of your introverted students a question, give them that space to be able to think through what you're asking, think through their response, and formulate an answer. And so that means we have to become very comfortable with silence. We have to be very um, we have to get past that of silence that can be really really uncomfortable. And so allow for that time, embrace the awkwardness of silence. It can be very awkward, but it's necessary to allow us introverted people to be able to come up with an answer that is meaningful. Something that I have noticed about myself over the years is that I sometimes will verbally process things, um, but I don't tend to say things when I'm answering somebody, especially. I don't tend to say things just to say them. I will speak when I have something to say. And so um, the lack of an answer or the lack of talking about something may not necessarily mean that I don't have an answer. It probably just means that I haven't got there yet. Or I'm thinking that what I have to say isn't important enough to spend the word capital that I have to just fill the air. And so I say things when I have something to say, and the rest of the time I'm thinking, but my thoughts don't always come out of my mouth. I think too, as a teacher, and I think this is just good teaching. This may not have much more to do with, and being introverted or extroverted, but allowing the student to say, I don't know, and allowing that to be an acceptable answer, and allowing for the student to have enough time to be able to formulate an answer and come back to it later. Um, I don't know. I tell my students all the time that I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer, because it is. If we don't have an answer yet, then we just need time to think through things and to experiment with things and work through things. And so giving your student the space to and the permission to say I don't know can be extremely freeing. And that doesn't mean that your progress is stalled. It does not mean that your student doesn't know what they're doing. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing a bad job as a teacher. It just means that they're not ready to move on to that next step of knowledge, or they haven't quite figured out what's going on inside there yet. And so giving them that space to say, I don't know, can be very, very helpful and very, very freeing. Can also be incredibly informative for me as a teacher, because then I know kind of where I need to carve out little space for them to think through things and experiment and work through some stuff. And then if they do have an answer, I know, okay, I can maybe leave that alone for a while, or we can continue to move on in that area, whatever. But those little I don't know places, those ambiguous, mysterious little places, those can be really, really fun, but they need to be cultivated rather than rushed through. We just kind of work with those little I don't know places a little bit. And introverts are fantastically good at cultivating and mulling and considering and kind of rolling over things in our minds a little bit before we move on. So those I don't know places can be really, really helpful. Um, Also, because introverts like me, we tend to sometimes process things more in writing. I think this can be really helpful with lesson notes, where if you have a process where you follow up with a student with lesson notes, and I do that with my clients. I send them, I have a formula that I follow with my lesson notes, and I pose questions to them that came up in lessons. Just remind them these are the things that we talked about. These are the things that we are going to work on, and I invite students to write back, to spend a little time thinking and write back if they have questions. Sometimes it is easier to put thoughts, particularly really complex thoughts, into a written form rather than to speak it. And so allowing a student to come back to you via email or text or whatever gives them time to think, gives them a space in which to do it so that they can write things and process it in that way, but keeps the conversation going too. And so allows you as the teacher also to kind of get their thoughts outside of the lesson time. I don't want to underestimate the pressure that an introverted student can sometimes feel in a lesson when they are asked a question like on the spot. That can be a really, really high pressure situation. And so, again, just allowing that pressure to kind of dissipate over time can allow a student to be able um, to work through that. Oops, I hit my mic. Hope that didn't make a big loud noise. Sorry, I'm learning. All right. So, specifically in the online space too, this is I have found this to be the most important thing, that with an online lesson world that we're in right now, I have to be very aware of the space that the student is inhabiting on their side of the screen. If they are in a living room space where there's possibly family around, that can make them feel incredibly self-conscious. A lot of times introverts, even performers, we are incredibly uncomfortable being in the spotlight. And so if they are, um, especially in a lesson where you're working on things where things are not like polished, performance ready and stuff. And so if they are in a place where they possibly could be heard or observed by other people, that can clam them up real fast. They can really, really kind of shut down. And so being aware of the space that they are in and knowing how far they're going to be comfortable with you challenging them or pushing them um, into growth areas, can be really, really important because what I noticed before I could this kind of clicked in my own head was that some of my introverted clients were like stalling in their process, and they just were not really making a lot of progress with what they were doing. And I finally figured it out, which I don't know why it took me so long, but I finally figured it out that they were feeling incredibly self conscious where they were. And so where I am, when we were in person, you're like, my studio is a super safe space. We can splat notes all over the walls here, and it doesn't matter. And after a time, even, my most introverted clients can really get comfortable with doing that in this space. But it's also very private. We're not broadcasting what they're doing anywhere, and they're away from home, and so they can be away from listening ears and all of that stuff. And so being aware of the space that they're in can really make a difference on how far you can push them. And so one of the things that me as an introvert, I cannot stand receiving public criticism. It's really difficult. And so um, if I am if I as a teacher am giving feedback to my student that might be perceived as negative and other people are around to hear that, that can really, really do a number on an introvert's headspace. And so being aware that the way that I frame my questions, that I frame my critiques, that I frame my instructions even can have an impact on how it lands for the student. And so that is really, really highly important with the environment that they're in. Lots of our people are at home, especially if you're working with teen and kid clients. It's really important actually that they are meeting online with you in a place where they can be monitored by an adult. Um, it is not a good look to have an adult meeting with a kid like where their computer's in their bedroom. That's just you know for safety reasons, that's not a great idea. But we do have to kind of temper that with, with our introverted kiddos, especially, um, you know, how are they going to feel kind of being exposed to their family while they're trying to do this? And so that's something to just keep in mind. If if at all. With adults, you can have sometimes a little bit more flexibility. They can adjust where they have their lessons. I've heard teachers talking about, sometimes their students pop online and they're in their car, trying to sing in their car. And I just want to encourage you, if you're the teacher, have a little grace for that student, because the car may be where they feel safest, because they're away from everyone else. And let's adjust. Let's meet the student where they are. And if they're not comfortable having a lesson where their family's around to hear it, let's see if we can work with them a little bit. Maybe adjust the time so there's fewer people around at their home, or find a way maybe they can be on headphones or something like that. So that they are kind of in their own little sound cocoon, something like that. There are myriad ways that you can work with an introverted student to help them create a safe space on their side of the screen so that they feel safe receiving the critique that they need to be able to get that vocal growth going. Um, if this is a really big one for me too. After a lesson, don't immediately like send them a text or send them an email and ask for responses. Um, Unless there's something like really, really time sensitive after a lesson, which is usually a really intense time with another person, give them some space to decompress. This is also very important after a performance. After I am done singing anywhere, and gosh, this was even true like after when I was working at the church. When I had a church job after service, when I was like done singing, I needed to go to my office for a few minutes to decompress before I went out to talk to anybody. So after performances, which are really, really intense times for introverts where they're interacting with other people, give them a little space to decompress. I almost always, after a recital, I've got to go hide in a closet for a few minutes before I can go talk to anybody. Otherwise, I am going to lose my mind. So give some students a little space after they've had that intense interaction, either with a lesson or in a performance or a recital or something. We really need that time, and we will be much happier for it. Um, and for introverts too, we tend to be a pretty creative bunch. So find ways to bring creativity into your lessons, um, and let them lead the way. Think about if you've, okay, let's just say like you've got a kind of a weird little problem. Let's say you're trying to figure out, maybe you've got a student that's having a little trouble accessing their head voice on a particular vowel in a particular passage. Isolate that little spot and ask your student, okay, let's think about some of the things that you've done in the past. What might work here? And let them start leading the ways. Let them start brainstorming things and let it go, like to the ridiculous things. Start throwing spaghetti at the wall and see what ideas they come up with and try them out. Your students may be able to come up with some really creative things to kind of get over that problem thing that's standing in their way. But if they are leading the process, that can give them ownership. It can maybe encourage them to try some new things, and it allows you as the teacher to be the guide instead of the guru. And that's really what we want in voice teaching anyway, right? We want to eventually work ourselves out of the job so that the students can kind of take the reins of their own vocal study and run with it. But ask the student for their ideas and brainstorm together, and write some things down. If you're using Zoom, you've got that whiteboard feature that you can write some things down and you can both be annotating ideas. Um, Try lots of things. Um, some things work great with other people, while they might not work with somebody else. And so, being able to try lots and lots of different things and having more than one way to skin that vocal cat, so to speak. If you've got multiple things that they can try, that really can bring a lot of creativity into your sessions. Think about different art forms. that you could use. You could use visual arts. You could use instrumental music, movement, dance. Again, be careful of where they are in space, where their space is. If they're trying different things, it can be, again, very difficult if they are in a place where they feel like they're going to be watched or judged. So be careful of that. But try different things to get some of that uh, to get some of those problems solved. You might also, think about how they might like write or map out the problem, and just uh, encourage them to just try writing things out and thinking about how they might solve the problem if they were in the teacher's chair, um, giving that them the opportunity to just kind of dream and brainstorm in that way. And the last thing that I would say before I wrap up here is don't try to fix the introverted students. Don't try to make them extroverts or make them less introverted. There are times when I've needed to be a little more um, forward in my own life, but um, there have been multiple times too where people have tried to suggest that I be someone that I'm not, and it's just not going to work. It is not going to work. Um, you know, your students are not broken because they're introverted. They are not. They really are not handicapped because they are introverted, and so please resist the urge to fix them. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir on that one because I know that, as teachers, we don't generally try to do that, but sometimes it can sneak in subtle ways, like when we insist our students are processing verbally. If we don't give them the space to do that internally, those little subtle things that may push our students to try to be more extroverted than they are. Be mindful of those little tiny moments where we are trying to get our students to be different than they are. And so I would just encourage you to allow them to be exactly who they are. So, recapping just a little bit, when you are working with an introverted student, allow for adequate processing time, and it will probably feel like it's too long. Embrace the awkward, let that time go, let it be as long as it needs to so that they can process before they answer. Be aware of the space that your student is in on the side their side of the screen so that you can know what you might need to adjust as far as how you are challenging them or what you're asking them to do. Um, After a lesson or after a performance, leave them alone for a little bit so they can have some breathing space before you even rush in to gush about how well they did. Just give them a breath, give them a minute. Try to find ways to bring creativity into your session so that your students are allowed to express their creativity and problem solving. And lastly, don't try to fix them. Let them be who they are. So hopefully now that I've rambled on for 20 some odd minutes, hopefully this mic worked and I didn't waste my time here. But I'm going to end here. And if you have any other tips for working with introverted students, um, I would love to see your comments about that. Um, on the other hand, too, if you have tips for working with extroverted students, um, particularly my extroverted teacher friends, if you have some insight into that, that would be really, really helpful. And if you do oh, I probably hear, I've got the window open, so you might hear a plane going over. I am kind of close to a flight path with the local airport. Um, anyway, if you do a counter video or a complimentary video about working with extroverted students, I would love to see that. Love to see it. So I would love for any teachers who are extroverts that would give us some tips on how to work better with extroverted students. I have some ideas, but I'm not an expert at being an extrovert because remember, 96% introvert here. So that's what I'm an expert in. All right. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is a glorious fall day, and I think I might run outside and go for a walk before it gets dark before too long. So I hope you have a fantastic day. See you soon.